Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Neglected News. I am your host, Aaron Jenkins. Thank you for tuning in with us on this October 5th, Thursday. Wow. This has been a very exciting weekend, hasn't it? With the mass shooting in Las Vegas, I want to send out my deepest condolences to all of those affected by this event that Mr. Paddock seemed to find need to enact. And I know everybody is kind of abuzz with this right now. The whole media is just going absolutely crazy with it. There's a lot of conflicting stories, conflicting evidence going on about this. And I know that a lot of that's going to play out here over the next few weeks. So before we really hear too much, or before we really assume too much is going on, let's wait till we get a lot of the facts about that. And who knows, again, by the time maybe a lot of this is being neglected, now you'll find that we'll want to talk about it with all of the information at hand. Speaking of information at hand, there is a very important topic I wanted to get into today, and it has to do with one of the most egregious bills that has been enacted upon our children, in my opinion. And this was a Texas bill that was recently passed. It's Texas HB 1600. And a little bit backstory about this was it was first passed in the Texas House on April 19th of this year, 2017. And then it was again passed through the Texas Senate on May 4th, 2017. The interesting thing was that this took effect on September 1st. And I really wanted to get into this on October 1st and kind of talk about this bill as the 1 month anniversary to it being enacted. But again, with the Vegas shooting happening, I really did not feel the need to involve anybody else's thoughts on anything but condolences towards those affected by this action. However, this is, again, a very important bill, and it specifically targets our children in a very specific way, in their mind and their mental health. And to get into that, the first thing I want to do is actually read you a direct verbatim statement from the bill itself. And now, again, this is from Texas HB 1600, and this is section 32.0249, and it states, mental health screenings in Texas Health Steps program. The Executive Commissioner in the rules governing the Texas Health Step program shall allow a provider to conduct a mental health screening using one or more validated, standardized mental health screening tools during each annual medical exam of a recipient who is at least 12 years of age but younger than 19. Now, there's several important parts in that wordage that are very, very much need to be brought to everybody's attention. The first of which is, it states that a mental health screening using one or more validated mental health screening tools is to be used. Now, who validates what mental health tools are being used? Who says that a specific practice is appropriate? Well, I would actually want to look into who was the main writers and contributors of this bill. But to do that, we actually have to go back far and look into something called the New Freedom Initiative, which was enacted during the Bush administration. And it basically was written entirely by Big Pharma. The law itself, the guidelines, the testing equipment, the books on all of the information, all of it was really guided by Big Pharma representatives. So when you're looking at who has the ability to say what is right, it's actually the people that prescribe medications for instances such as this. Notice any conflicting interests going on there? Notice anybody taking advantage of a situation? How about if they tell you you have to take a drug and they're the ones that prescribe it? Doesn't that seem a little bit suspicious? Okay, well, let's look at the next part of this, it says that these tests will be done during each annual medical exam of a recipient. Now, between the ages of 12 and 19, the years that this bill specifically points out, what happens to a school-age child of these years that is trying to participate in the social scene of public schools or even sports? Well, they are required to have what's called a physical. Everybody knows that has children, everybody that has a brain and can think for themselves, knows what a physical exam is. A medical exam each year to determine whether or not you're physically fit enough to participate in certain activities. It's also a time when they are able to push for immunizations and the such. What happens during this time in these people's lives is they're getting checked up every time. Well, if you insert a mental health exam during each one of these, you are taking 7 years of a person's most volatile time of their life. It's when, many of them are going through puberty. We all know what that happens to our emotions, to our bodies. Many of us are still having trouble figuring out who we're going to become. So a lot of people are not in a perfect state of life at these times in their life, especially with social media. Social interactions themselves within schools are becoming very hostile. There's very much negativity, and everybody is being taught to live up to these standards that not the average person can reach. So if they want to take a child who is going through this and give them a mental health screening, there's only one purpose of that, and that is to prescribe them pharmaceutical medications. Why would you want to prescribe almost 50% of the population, children, pharmaceutical medications? Well, it's going to do multiple things. It's going to put more money in Big Pharma's pocket. It's going to drug your children. It's going to dumb them down, make them into zombies. How many of these people that you see on pharmaceutical antidepressants are just emotional zombies? They're neither happy nor sad. They just exist and don't really get to experience life for what it truly is. Well, so within that, I want to point out some very dangerous things about what could be a result of this, and that's going to be what happens when your child goes to the doctor, your teenager, and they're just having a bad day, or they've been having a rough month, or they broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend weeks before, and they go in for this mental health screening, and when they're asked whether or not they're happy or depressed, and they answer honestly about a temporary situation in their life, what happens when that person is deemed or diagnosed with a mental health condition such as bipolar, depression, so on and so forth? They're going to start to prescribe your child medication. This is what is the most egregious part of this bill, is because they have forced you into opening the door for your child to be diagnosed and prescribed antipsychotic pharmaceutical medications. And to get into that, let's go into a little bit of kind of facts and histories in here. Most of us understand that have done any bit of research. We look at many of the mass shootings across the country and throughout history, and we notice that there are many things in common. But the most prevalent one and the most important is that 99% of the time, these guys are jacked up on SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibiting drugs. And most of them are antidepressants, antipsychotics. Well, when you have a law forcing a child to succumb to this just on the whim of a doctor who doesn't know your child, doesn't know what they're going through, you're allowing this to progress into something very egregious. Now let's give a little more backstory and explain that there are being laws and statutes trying to be implemented all over the country in which you don't even have to be prescribed or under medication for such a condition. All you have to have is a diagnosis of said condition. And thereby you can risk losing your Second Amendment right, according to these statutes that are put into place and no longer have the ability to protect yourself because when you were a teenager, you had a little bit of time when you just weren't up to snuff. Now, does that sound like the right way to treat somebody, the right way to label and mark them for the rest of their life? Not at all. Not especially when we see too much of dopamine addictions towards social media, Facebook, YouTube. Everybody is paying so much attention to what their friends think about them and what they feel about them that many of them already go through this depression just because of that we don't need to give them mind-altering drugs that will exacerbate these feelings. And to really get deep into this, I want to point out a few things that I found. And a big one was Huffington Post, who, to their credit, every now and then does get a few things right. They actually were forced to post an article back in 2011. Well, actually, I do need to correct myself on that. The article itself was actually published on September 13th of 2009. However, according to Huffington Post, it was updated November 17th, 2011. And this is an article that was posted by, or put up by a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Peter R. Breggin. And the interesting thing about this, without going into too much detail, those of you who do care enough, go ahead and read into this. But the interesting thing about this is the title. The headline of this article is Medication Madness: How Psychiatric Drugs Cause Violence, Suicide, and Crime. And in this, a well-known psychiatrist even points out that there is a direct link in these SSRIs and the way that they affect the hormones in your brain, causing different emotional and psychological episodes. The big portion to focus in on all of this is that we all know that things like street drugs and extreme alcoholism, taking drugs all the time, is not beneficial to us. The hard thing for many of us to understand is that most people trust their doctors to prescribe them things that are going to help them. And this is not always the case, especially with these SSRIs and these antipsychotic drugs that are put out. Well, I'll give you a perfect example. Antidepressants. What are they supposed to do? They're supposed to keep you from being depressed, right? Well, what happens when an antidepressant actually causes chronic depression? Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Well, why don't you look this up? This is a condition specifically of when an antidepressant induces chronic depression. It has a name. It's called tardive dysphoria. And it's a perfect example of how these pharmaceutical drugs do not always give us the results that we are looking for or the results that we're told are going to happen. So this is a perfect example. Now let's go even further into this and try to give examples of where this has been proven, because I know a lot of people listening are not going to want to hear all this at first hand. You're going to be overcome by what I always like to point out as confrontational bias, when you vested so much of your time into something that to go and follow another ideology, you first have to admit that you've been duped, and none of us want to do that. So the first thing that I want to point out is that we're going to be talking about the InfoWars, Natural News, even the London Telegraph have all reported these connections between SSRIs and mass shootings, suicides, other egregious crimes. But let's get into something a little more well-known, and let's get some results from the Citizens Commission on Human Rights International. And these are, I want to get into reports just from them for a second. They state that at least 35 school shootings and or school-related acts of violence have been committed by those taking or withdrawing from psychiatric drugs. So, listen to that second part, being withdrawing. How many people have seen the drug users that go through major withdrawals? These opiate addictions have major withdrawals physically. What's the difference in a drug that is altering the chemicals in your brain when you immediately stop taking it? All those chemicals are going to start going up and down and become very volatile, and as your brain and your body tries to maintain homeostasis and get everything back to a balance. So during this time, that is when it is the most dangerous. Another thing they are reporting is that despite 27 international drug regulatory warnings on psychiatric drugs, citing effects of mania, hostility, violence, and even homicidal ideation, and dozens of high-profile shootings and killings tied to psychiatric drug use, there has yet to be any federal investigation on the link between psychiatric drugs and the acts of senseless violence. Now, you ask, why am I citing all these links if there hasn't been one? Well, there has, but like this states, there hasn't been a federal investigation. That means the people that are looking into this are your well-meaning, caring individuals, good-meaning doctors, good-meaning psychiatrists, people who are in the fields that are exposing it for what it is. However, the government itself is not doing anything to try to stop that. That is what that means. Try this one on for size, ladies and gentlemen. Between 2004 and 2012, there have been 14,773 reports to the United States FDA's MedWatch system on psychiatric drugs causing violent side effects. 14,000 reports in 8 years. Now, the FDA's MedWatch states that this includes 1,531 cases of homicidal ideation or homicide itself, and then 3,287 cases of mania, and 8,219 cases of aggression. Look at that. All of that within 8 years. Now let's get to the more serious portion of that. The FDA itself, it estimates that less than 1% of all serious reports are ever reported to it. So those numbers you're getting are admitted by FDA's MedWatch that is not the correct numbers, that they're going to be much higher. Now let's get into some actual kind of factual things that we've seen over the years that give us even more substantial proof that there does need to be a federal investigation on this, and we don't need to be forcing our children into this without the proper information first. Well, in July 1st of 2009, here in the United States, the FDA required the smoking aid and the antidepressant, bupropion, which is known by the street names of, or the names of Zyban and Wellbutrin, actually had to add warnings to it, to their box warnings. And those that they added are very interesting. The ones that they added were those of neuropsychiatric symptoms. Those symptoms included a change in behavior, hostility, agitation, depressed mood, suicidal thoughts and behavior, and even attempted suicide. That is a warning label on a anti-smoking or an antidepressant that you may be taking may actually cause you to have suicidal thoughts or want to commit suicide. How does something that is supposed to keep you from being depressed depress you? How does something that is supposed to keep you from being depressed make you want to commit suicide or make you hostile? Well, that's not the only one, and it's not the only class of drugs that's been applied to. Let's look at something else. I was a product of the 90s. I was born in 85, as I tell many people. So I grew up in the age of ADHD was a big time, designer disease, as I like to call them. It's very difficult to say that anybody that has a hard time staying focused on one task and is very hyperactive, that there's anything wrong with them. We're all different people, and we all need to glorify and all of our differences and be proud of our differences, not try to normalize every single person into an idea, because that's when we're starting to create these zombies, taking them from the way that they were genetically predisposed. Many hyperactive, scatterbrained people have created some amazing things. There have been many inventions, many successful people from this that didn't take medication like this. They were just always known to be a very up and going and moving person. Well, in the United States in February 2012, the FDA actually had to update Adderall's label. Adderall, which is being generally prescribed in lieu of Ritalin, or in place of Ritalin, they had to update this label to include psychotic episodes at recommended doses. That's the very first thing that they added to it. Psychotic episodes at the recommended doses. Think about that, people. You don't even have to be abusing this, as many kids are starting to do out on the street with this being sold as a black market drug. At recommended doses, it can cause psychotic episodes. It can also cause overstimulation, restlessness, irritability, euphoria, dyskinesia, which is difficulty in performing voluntary movements, or dysphoria, depression, tremors, tics, anger, and aggression. Think about that, folks. This is something that your child is supposed to take because they're already too wound up, and this will just has the potential to make them even more wound up, give them tremors, give them tics, make them even angry many times. But this is something that we are just lovingly pumping into our child's bodies. It just, to me, makes no sense why we allow this to continue. Even in 2010, the FDA had to add on the warning section of Provigil, which is modafinil. I hope I'm saying that right, everybody. Modafinil. They actually had to add the warning section, aggression. Once again, a pharmaceutical that causes aggression, causes anger. It's absolutely amazing that people are allowing this to continue. Because when we pump our children full of drugs, not only are we zombifying them, but if we allow this bill to go through, if we allow it to be practiced, because it's already gone through, ladies and gentlemen, like I stated, but if we allow this to be practiced, then what you're going to see is even more children on these drugs, more children who at the very peak times in their life when their body's really changing and their brain is still not fully formed. I want you to understand that. When you give a child or even an adolescent mind-altering compounds, mind-altering drugs, things that will change the chemical and hormonal balances that are supposed to be balanced for a reason, when they give their children drugs that change these things, especially when the brain is still growing, you're destroying the child's brain. You're affecting them for the rest of their lives. And we really need to be thinking about, are we going to allow to put all of these things into our children's body? If we have all of the information, would you still give your child this drug that is just going to wreck them and has the potential to make them the next person you see at the top of the screen for a horrific event? But there is definitely a widespread clinical use of SSRIs. It has skyrocketed, as has all of these different conditions that we keep seeing, all these different instances and episodes. Dylan Roof on SSRIs. Now Paddock, SSRIs. Multiple others that I just can't even list right now. But look it up. Do the research yourself. Another thing I want to point out on a side note, everybody, and we'll get back into this in our next broadcast that we talk about the Vegas shooting. I want y'all, if you do research on this, because many of you are going to be focusing a lot, you're going to be hearing a lot about the Vegas shooting, and it's probably going to overwhelm you. You probably forget about this broadcast shortly thereafter. But also look at the voting records of many of these people that are committing these egregious acts, because 9 times out of 10 you do not see conservative Republicans going out and shooting up everybody. It is these mentally deranged leftists that have bought completely into the system. That's it. If you buy completely into the system and tell the government that you do not want to make decisions for yourself and that you will allow them to make the decisions for you, they will not make the decisions that are in your best interest. They will make the decisions that are in their best interest. So I want everybody to continue to think about that, to realize what you're doing. Don't neglect Texas HB 1600. Look it up. Pay attention. Educate yourself. Like I always say, if you make a decision that I don't agree with, but you've made it because you've educated yourself, you have the facts, and you still come to the conclusion that you have, then I salute you, because you have done more than the average person who does nothing more than what the headlines command them to. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and sign off of this very short, only 27-minute broadcast. Blessings once again to all of those in Las Vegas. Remember, our prayers are with you. There was no reason this should have happened, and I'm very sure everything that's been neglected we'll be hearing about in the next few days on the Las Vegas shooting. Thank you once again, everybody. You all have a great night. This is Aaron Jenkins signing off.